Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Hum Legend series podcast, where today we sat down with Memphis legend Tony Adams to discuss his time working with prominent musicians in the industry and the music he made in Memphis that makes him a legend. Enjoy.
Well, you know what? Let's try this again. So
Okay.
we are live at Station 8 for the Hum podcast, the Legend series. The purpose of this podcast is to sit down with Memphis legends specifically and just document, part of what has made Memphis great. There was obviously a big movement, and it has continued to progress ever since. And it's important to acknowledge and appreciate the generations that have come before and helped lay the groundwork for, what we're doing and what we're doing to move forward with it. And I think that's highlighted by the fact that Mr. Tony Adams is sitting across the table from me here. Tony, how you doing?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. So Tony is you do a lot of things. There's a lot of what you're making a living one way, but you're pursuing your hobbies in other ways. You get a lot of things going on. And I was actually connected to you by Brad Webb, who was on our last chapter of the Hum Legend series. Another Memphis legend. You're a Memphis legend. So let's start. Let's give people some context.
Okay.
Who are you? What do you do?
My name is Tony Adams, and I'm first and foremost a drummer slash percussionist, and I also write music, sing. But about 30 years ago or so, I fell into doing what's called drum teching, which basically means tuning drums for other people.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of drum teching, Tony here just set up Station 8's drum set to perfection. Just did the sound test and everything on the mic. Sounds incredible. Not surprised. Appreciate you.
I appreciate the opportunity. The thing about teching for me was when I first started playing, we were kids and couldn't afford really good gear, so we had crappy.
How old were you?
I think I was probably about 11 when I started playing. I was in high school band, marching band, and stage orchestra, and I threw a newspaper route for about 3 years to get up enough money to buy a crappy used drum
3
set.
years.
Yes.
Put in your work, huh? You worked for it.
I did.
When did you know? I mean, 3 years is a long time as a child to know, hey, I want a drum set and I'm going to work really hard and get it. How did you know that was it for you?
Well, for some reason, I always had a thing for drums. I remember when I was really little, my mother used to get me these, for Christmas, she would get me one of these little tin drums that I think they had paper heads or something on them and about a pair of 8-inch drumsticks. And I loved those things. And for whatever reason, I've always understood drums. I get it. I mean, over the years, I managed to refine tuning techniques, and I confuse people all the time when I tell them that the drums tell me what's wrong with them, and they do. If you listen to it, if you know what you're listening for, it'll tell you what's wrong with it.
Would it be fair to say you're a drum shaman? That's what it sounds like to me, because you're not wrong.
I've been called a lot of things. I don't think I've ever been called that, but
Hey, there are worse things to be called, am I right?
Yes, there are. I've probably been called those too. I just think that, especially after the years I spent working in studios, I was a studio rat for a long time, years and years, and that taught me critical listening, and I could tell in the studio if it was top head or bottom head, just depending upon what I was listening to. Mm-hmm. It used to mystify the engineers when I would tell somebody there's one lug, maybe two out on the bottom head of that middle rack tom. How does he know that? I'm listening to the drum. I don't know another way to explain it to you.
So you said it was 11. You were playing in high school, high school band, or maybe middle school band and all that moving forward. When did you start jamming with other people? And because I want to get the story up to when you became a drum tech, because that's an interesting story in its own right. But I know you were jamming before then.
I was in My old neighborhood, which is actually where we are now, you're kind of on the edge of it. I grew up on Tutwiler, right at Highland.
Mm-hmm.
And in that neighborhood, there were probably, at that time, 6 or 7 good drummers that all came from the neighborhood, and we all hung around each other. And it was a friendly competition, if you will.
Was it friendly?
It was. Somebody had a hot lick, they wouldn't show it to somebody else, but you'd watch them until you stole it. I mean,
Yeah.
so then they had to have another hot lick.
Yeah.
And
So everybody traded.
yep, and some of them did some private tutors, and there was actually the band that Brad was in at the time had a jam house out back of one of the guys in the band's house, and people would go over there and you just jam all day long. Everybody would trade instruments.
Mm-hmm.
You change drummers every other jam and just hang out. That's what I grew up on, and it was the same at some other people's houses that I knew. And I thought, I had no other point of reference. I thought that's the way it was everywhere, that everybody in the neighborhood just got together and jammed. And I got a rude awakening when I left Memphis and went to Austin.
Uh-oh.
But
What do you think it was about Memphis that kind of made that environment what it was?
I think there were a lot of people, a lot of musicians that were just hungry. And most of the guys from that neighborhood actually studied what came before them. They studied the progression of blues from the Delta south of us up the Mississippi through Memphis and on up to Chicago. As an offshoot of that, they studied the origins of rock and roll, which largely originated right here in Memphis. And at that time, the rock and roll was still on the upswing from here, as was not so much the blues. And like in the 60s, the blues kind of sort of slowed down a little bit. Most of those guys went to England and played and turned the English guys onto it. But it became an R&B movement here in Memphis, and you began to have people like Stax Records open up. Of course, the old Sun label before that, and then which I kind of had a connection to, the Phillips family, but it began to branch out more and more. The rock and roll scene kind of changed in the 60s. What was the funny part of it was then in the late 50s and early 60s, when the blues guys went to Europe, they went to play in the UK, and the British kids loved it. And then in the 60s, with the British invasion, basically they came back over here and sold us our own blues music with louder amps.
It turned it to 11, huh?
Essentially what they did. And I mean, people like the Stones, I'm sure Keith Richards would say that, or acknowledge that.
Yeah. Was there, what were there any big, I guess, influencers musically in Memphis specifically, or just as a whole? Like, I'm sure the Stones were up there, but what you guys were listening to as inspiration during this time?
There were a lot of people. Of course, the stuff coming out of Stax, and there was a lot of it then, specifically Otis Redding, and the rhythm section that did probably the majority of the Stax stuff. You had people like Duck Dunn, Steve Cropper. I mean, just some monster players. Those guys, I don't know how much recognition. I mean, they were in other bands that that toured and played, but I don't know how much national and international notoriety they got until those two guys were playing in the backup band for the Blues Brothers. And I know they really got high profile then. But all of those guys, I mean, that's what we listened to.
Was there any sort of energy when you guys were jamming together? Was there any sort of energy around making it? Or was it really just about playing, or like because when you start making it a business and you start to really try to push it in that way, it can become something very different. So I'm wondering, because I know my experiences when I was that age and what was going on, but I'm wondering, how was it then?
Well, I didn't think of it so much as looking at it as trying to make it. I always had this attitude of this is who I am and this is what I do. Mm-hmm. And once I hit my 20s, I promised myself that if I ended up in my old age broke and a starving musician, that I wasn't going to cry about it because it was my own decision. I mean, I could have gone and learned.
And you loved it enough to feel that way and to be in that position?
Yes. I could have gone to school and been a lawyer, been a doctor. I didn't care. When I was young, I didn't care if I had food. I didn't care about anything except the next time I got to sit down behind my drums and play. Literally, that was, and it cost me a lot. It cost me a number of relationships, not to mention the financial strain. But again, I just reconciled it with myself that this is my chosen path. So I'm a big boy. If it comes with hard licks,
yeah. Well, it's funny too. Like when you think of making it, the immediate thought is financial success. But sitting here across from you, and I know the way I was, I guess, introduced to you before I'd actually met you was a track that Brad had that you were playing with by Mississippi Morris, I believe, down there. He's one of the first guys playing down on Beale. I mean, to me, you're already jamming. That's before you've even moved into the later part of your life. You're already jamming and doing things that now I look back on and just see with, a lot of appreciation and, a lot of understanding of how incredible that was. That's making it, because you're making music in a place that it matters and people that really appreciated it. And that's a lot of success to be had before you've even started teching and actually, paying the bills and doing what you do. And I don't know, it's funny. We always think of like that financial success, but I'd share some perspective from my end.
Well, teching in the studio where I teched on a lot of major label album projects, big projects. And I got sort of a crash course in the music business early on because I got signed just before my 18th birthday to a record deal here in Memphis and kind of got a crash course in the do's and the don'ts of the music business.
The business end.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw it played out and repeated with various bands on these major label album projects that would come in, and most of them, I mean, and granted, these are kids off the street, so they have no real perspective except what they've experienced. And to them, being signed to a record label is, they think that means they've made it.
Right.
The reality is that all it means is now you have a ticket where you can actually go to work. And the downfall of many of these guys is that they don't understand the business end of the music business. They were doing it because it was fun. Got them girls. They were having a good time. And it can become drudgery when you're doing it for a living if you let it be drudgery.
Well, so for you, when you said, so you were 17, almost 18, who were you playing with then when you got signed?
Lewis Paul, who had been in a band from Memphis called the Guillotines. And Laddie Hutcherson, and I can't remember the third guy's name. were this trio, first band I ever saw that had hair to their waist, and they had a regional hit called "I Don't Believe," which is still a really good song that Laddie Hutchinson wrote. And Lewis was an amazing musician. He was a guitar player, but I don't care if you had a set of bagpipes laying around, if it was some ocarina, he could pick it up and within 20 minutes play it. It was the most, and it goes for horns too. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. Just an extremely talented musician, great singer, but there were some screws loose in there. And
I think it's impossible not to. If you have that much natural talent and your brain just works that way, it's a give and take situation.
Sort of, yes. I remember early on with Lewis, when we would get together, I would find a magazine and pick it up. And when he was talking to me, I would start reading the magazine. So I only got about half of what he was telling me, so that I could kind of filter some of the nuttiness. And we practiced. Somehow we got Mike Ladd, who owned Mike Ladd's Guitar City here, let us come in the store and practice at night. I would use one of the kits there, and that led to us ended up being signed with Jerry Phillips, who was one of Sam Phillips' son, and this promo guy named Eddie Braddock, who was married now to Linda Gale Lewis, Jerry Lee's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a record at the old Phillips Studios here in Memphis that Sam built when he sold Elvis his contract to RCA. Sam got a chunk of money. By today's standards, wasn't much, but it was a chunk in those days. And he built his own studio, which in its day, it was a high-tech place. That was the first studio I saw that had ISO booths for amps, ISO cabinets for amps. And what was the B room in there, the last session that Elvis did in there, when they got done, they closed the door and locked it. All of the instruments were still sitting in there, and we would go in to record, and they would let us in the B room so we could walk in, look around, and they'd lock us in the studio. We'd sit in there and play music all night, and made a record for a subsidiary of Stax at that time. That was my first real recording experience. And the first day of that, Phillips was undergoing a transformation. They had just come out with these new 24-track consoles, and they'd had one installed, but they weren't done with it yet, and there were wires hanging out the back. And Jerry was having a problem pulling up drum sounds. So I'm out in the big room on a kit, and I see Sam Phillips walk in, and he shoos Jerry out of the chair, sits down, and hits talk back, and says, "Drummer, lay your wallet on that snare." "Yes, sir."
That's what you say.
Yes, sir, Mr. Phillips. So I put my wallet on the snare. "All right, let me hear you kick." "All right, snare." "All right, first rack." "All right, floor tom." And inside of 3 minutes, we had drum sounds. And that's what went on the record. So that was my initial.
So how long was that project? How long were you playing with them? And and what were you doing? Like, once you were signed, you recorded there. Did you tour on it? Like, what all did you do with it?
I didn't. And before we got started on the project, and I kind of got a little less than amused, because the label was taking care of Lewis and nobody else. And so I
At
ended
all?
up, no. And I ended up, my girlfriend at the time, we ended up moving to Texas. And they called me in Texas and said, look, we really want you to come back, finish this record. So I reached a deal and I said, look, just release me from the contract and we'll do this as session work. So they flew me back to Memphis. I went in and finished the record. And then I don't know anything about the touring after it because I didn't do anything.
Why'd you move to Texas?
Well, my girlfriend at the time, who ended up eventually being my wife, my first wife, we knew we were either going to go to Atlanta, where she had lived before, or go to Austin. And we decided to go to Austin because we knew one person there.
Austin, that's like, it's becoming the new LA, the new New York. It's biggest venture capitalist city in the country. It's wild. A lot of money there.
Yeah, it wasn't that way when I was there. It still had there was a music scene there. But when you went downtown in the summertime, when UT let out, it was like a ghost town. I was driving home from a band rehearsal one time. I'm on Congress Avenue, right downtown. Stopped at a light. I look over and on the corner, there's a coyote sitting there, downtown Austin. And I was ended up being in a 10-piece horn band there.
Okay, so you did play some music down there.
Oh yeah, the horn section was from the UT Lab Ensemble, and we played all over the Southwest, all as far up as Colorado, and that was where I learned to actually work and kick a horn section. I was in that band, which helped me because at one point we were friends with another band that was a group called the Techniques 4, which was kind of like the Temptations. 4 guys standing up front that had dance routines and sang, and they were coming back from a gig in Colorado, and their Winnebago went off the side of a mountain and destroyed the band's gear and broke the drummer's back.
Oh my gosh.
So the band that I was in went out as their backup bands, and having worked with the horn section actually helped me with that because you'd have to kick the dance steps, just like a horn section with that. And at some point then we decided we were going to leave Texas and go to Atlanta.
Okay, I knew you went to Atlanta, so this must be, how old were you at this time?
I was probably 22 or 23 when I moved to Atlanta. And I was in Atlanta for a long time. I actually stopped playing for a while and then gradually got back into playing and ended up being in a few bands in Atlanta, played all over the Southeast, and did more studio work there. I did a little bit when I was in Austin with the horn band, but that was about the extent of the studio stuff I did there. Most of my experience in the studios came in Atlanta.
Yeah, so what point how did you become a drum tech in Atlanta? Because that's where it started, more or less, right?
Yes. When I first moved to Atlanta, one of the first musicians I met there was a guitar player named Rick Meyer. And ultimately, Rick ended up owning a place called Triclops Studios, which was a Neve and Studer analog studio, and did a bunch of records. First Matchbox 20 record was done there. First Seven Dust record was done there. Warren Haynes' first solo record was done there. Hole lived through this. There were a bunch of records that were done in that room. And when Rick had that, he called me one day and said, "Look, I had to fire some guys. I caught them partying with girls in here after the studio was closed." And he said, "I fired them. Can you come help me answer the telephone?" So, okay. So I went. I'm in the office up front answering telephones. And one day one of the engineers came in and stuck his head in and said, "Hey, you know how to change a head on a drum and tune it, don't you?" "Yeah." So I went out, and then that led to, actually it was during Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream was cut there too. And Butch Vig was the producer, and Butch was actually a good drummer. And Butch would tune the kit, and they called me in one day, and I said, "Butch is out here on the kit, and he can't figure out what's going on." So I went in the control room, and he's going around the drums, and this is a classic case in point when I'm listening, I hit talk back and tell him, "Butch, the middle rack tom's got a couple of lugs out, one or two lugs out on the bottom head." He went right to it, found them, corrected it, and they're all looking at me like I had two heads. So then they started calling me in there more and more. "Come in here and listen to this. Come in here and listen to this." And then Rick Meyer began to promote me to people, and the projects would come in. "You really need to get this guy to do your drums for you." So that's when I realized, "Oh, you mean they'll pay me to do this?"
30 years later.
Yes.
Well, so how was it going from, I guess, being, at that point, so how old were you when that happened?
I was in my 30s.
Yeah, so
early
you've been
30s.
jamming, 15 plus years at this point as a musician. How was the transition going from spending, I guess, more of the time and more of the focus teching and supporting and making the studio happen as opposed to playing the drums?
Well, to
Was
me,
it difficult?
No, it wasn't difficult. To me, it was a natural thing because there was really no sea change for me. I looked at it like this, especially in light of what I told you about guys signing record deals. Because some of the bands would come in and the people would be miserable. The record label would be making them miserable. And I saw it like this. My career's not on the line on this record being a hit. I want to make a good record because my name's going to be on it. My part, I want it to be good, but if it flops, I'll be working tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And it was still messing with drums, which was something I loved. And especially, it was, with some producers, it was never boring. Matt Serletic was a case in point. And Matt had a master's in music, and he had the ears of a bat. So first of all, you had to be on your toes. You didn't slide any bull by Matt because he could hear it. And second of all, he had just a limitless imagination, and you never knew what he would ask you for. And he would come to me sometimes and sing some noise. "I need something that does this." Okay. Give me a minute. And what I would do is go out in the room and I'd put together like 4 things. "All right, let me hear what you got. How about this?" "No." "How about this?" "No." "How about this?" "That's it." And people used to quiz me and say, "How can I get into drum tech?" And we'll be able to tune first, but stuff like that.
Make sounds.
I don't know how to tell you to think on your feet because I was making it up as I went along. Especially with Matt. If Matt came to me one day and said, "I need you to paint the kit purple and hang it from the ceiling," give me a minute. I know he's going somewhere.
Do you feel like just drum teching in these situations, do you feel like it got you good opportunities to play again, though? It just seems like naturally you're going to be playing with people throughout this process. Or was it really like heads down teching?
No, well, some of both. And sometimes it was really weird. The single weirdest night I've ever had in the studio was on the first Matchbox record. And it was near the end of it. I'm going to tell tales out of school here. When we got started, Matt wasn't too happy. And he sent the engineer to me about the third day in and asked, he said, Matt wants to know if you'll play drums on this record. And I said, you know, I would love to, but you're asking me to commit professional suicide here because I don't have a Hollywood agent. I live solely by word of mouth. And you hired me as a tech, not as a player. And you bump a guy off his own record. Last thing I need is some guy out there telling people, don't hire this guy, he'll snake your gig. So I turned Matt down. He wasn't real happy about that. So flash forward.
That's a hard choice, though. It had to be. How long did you sit with that one? Was it pretty instantaneous? That seems really tough. I mean,
well, I would have loved to have done it, but
you had respect for the situation.
It was the
involved.
truth. It was the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I had similar instances crop up later on, and I've always avoided that. I'm not going to sit there and try to take some guy's gig. When they hire me as a tech, I have one job, and that's to make that guy look and sound as good as possible, period. That's what I'm being paid for. And so flash forward to near the end of the Matchbox record. And we had a song called Back to Good. And Matt said, I want to do something different on this. He said, I want to put a kit in the ISO booth. So I had one of my old kits, an old Rogers kit in the studio. So I said, well, I'm going to go set my Rogers kit up. I set it up, I tweak it. And while I'm in there, he plays me the demo for the song, which was Rob at a piano playing Back to Good. I'm like, okay, I'll listen, all right. So, and he said he wanted this to be played with hot rods. Okay, fine, I got it ready. I send the drummer around. He goes in and he's struggling playing with the hot rods. He's struggling, and I see Matt slumping in his chair. I said, let me go see if he's doing something mechanically that I can help him with, if maybe he's just holding them funny or whatever. So I go around, I'm in the ISO booth with the drummer. And it's not that he's doing anything mechanically wrong, he just is struggling to do it. And in fairness to him, he had gotten the mumps and had gone home and had been sick and had just come back trying to finish this record. The label's yelling at Matt every day. They want this record done. And he was just struggling. Well, we're both in the ISO booth. The door opens, Matt comes in, and he looks at the drummer and says, we're out of time, we're over budget. We've already got this. I recorded Tony playing when I played him the demo in here. Because I was at the kit, and he said, I want to hear how the hot rods sit to this song. So he played me that. I didn't know the song. He played me the demo. So I listened to it, find the groove. And when I fell in, so all I could do is play the groove. Well, Matt recorded that, took the part where I fell in, and that's now the intro to Back to Good, and just looped me through the song. Well, when he did that, the first thought through my mind was I wanted to be anywhere else on this planet but in that little room, because Paul, the drummer's face fell. He got up, jumped up from behind the kid and took off. I looked at Matt, thanks. This was a straight ambush. And I get his motivation. I understand and everything, but still.
Yeah. So
I had to chase Paul down in the kitchen, and I told him, look, I got ambushed just like you did. I didn't know this. Long story short, that incident actually made Paul end up trusting me even more. So later on, then, when I ended up going out touring with them, and that record broke, it broke really hard. And I was still trying to stay in the studios, but with the advent of Pro Tools, the writing was on the wall, so to speak. Everybody and their brothers was going to start becoming a producer in their mom's basement. And unless I wanted to move to LA, then the big label projects, like I was used to working on, were going to start getting slim. So the record was breaking really hard, and Matchbox called me and said, look, this record is breaking hard. Can you come out? We're going to do the Tonight Show. Just come make sure the drums are right. Okay. So I go out there, and then it was David Letterman. Make sure they're right. Then it was, well, look, the record's still breaking hard. 30-day Key City tour. Just come help us on this. These are key markets. Okay. Well, that 30-day Key City tour, about 23 months later, we were getting ready to go back around the world, go back to Australia. And I said, boys, I love you, but people in the studio are starting to forget my phone number. So I went home, but up until, I was 2 years of touring with them, and Paul trusted me completely because of that incident in the studio, which was really weird at first.
Mm-hmm. So did you continue I guess at this point, when did you go back to Memphis? Because you're in Atlanta, you start gigging, and then you're out on tour, doing that. And this is, building a relationship like that too comes from being genuine, by the way, and just having good integrity and being a person that is, there's not a lot of those that has those qualities. It wasn't a lot, I'm sure, back then, but I tell you what, it's slim pickings these days. But so it's just not often that you find that level of integrity in people and folks, and it's cool because not every musician, especially, is going to be like, oh yeah, I'm not going to be on that record, even though they're asking me directly, and it could be a huge opportunity for me. I think it's more important to respect the person that's already there. Like, what an incredible thing. Well, that's got to be acknowledged first.
I appreciate that. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And now, and I'm from Memphis, and I don't have a problem with a good old-fashioned head cutting session. You want to go out and we'll see who can smoke who. I'm fine with that. But I was looking at this as I was going to approach. I was being paid to tech. To me, if you're being paid to do X, then you do X professionally. Mm-hmm. And
you respect the order of command and how it's supposed to be. Structure, consistency.
Especially when I was trying to build a career out of it. And I knew when I went home from the Matchbox tour.
I was going to say, it worked out.
I went independent then. I was no longer working at Triclops. And that was a scary thing because
keep this mic close.
I was sitting there thinking, is my phone going to ring? And it did. And invariably, again, I had no Hollywood agent. Mm-hmm. So I lived and died by word of mouth. And drummers that I worked for in the studio would recommend me to other drummers. Engineers and producers that I worked with would either call me back for another project or recommend me to somebody else. So it was at that point when I was freelancing like that I had to make a trip back to Memphis for my mother's funeral. My mother died. So I came back, and while I was here, I talked to Brad, and he said, come by the studio. We got to record something because God only knows when we'll see each other.
Was this his studio?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can hear him talk about that in our last podcast. He talks all about the studio, starting it.
And so I went over and we cut a couple of things. And then when I went back to Atlanta, we kept talking. And as me being independent for record projects, I realized that it kind of didn't matter where I lived, because the majority of the time, the record, I mean, in Atlanta, there were some records that were done in Atlanta and some stuff, local stuff that I would work on. But by and large, I might get a call, might have to go to New York, Boston, LA, wherever. And so it really didn't matter where I lived, you know, if I was going to go do a record project somewhere. So that's when I started commuting back and forth and writing with Brad. We started writing and recording more and more. And then when I moved back here to start a project with him, the Pocket Rockets, which we ended up going and getting Blind Mississippi Morris off his sofa and took him down to Beale Street, and we played on Beale for years. People used to come from all over the world. They'd go to Beale Street. Oh, yeah, Beale Street in Memphis.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd come and they'd hear us playing. Go, where are you guys from? Right here. Right here. We grew up here. And
So when you came back and you started jamming again, did you fall right back into the roots like you did when you were jamming over at Brad's house in the back room or whatever, you know, growing up? Was it seamless?
it was like giving a junkie a fix. But now I'd had an education in recording. I mean, I had good fortune to work with some really good producers and some just monstrous engineers. I got to look over their shoulders and steal tricks, you know, or have them explain stuff to me. And really got my eyes opened in how the studio works and the recording process works. And working on as many albums as I did, I knew what was involved in making a record, start to finish. And I say that despite some crazes that the record industry went through there for a while, like normally on a record project, you come in and you track all the drums first. You put down scratch tracks, you track all the drums, and then you go to overdub mode and you record bass. Then you put guitars and keys and you overdub until you have the final thing, and then it gets mixed. Somebody started this little trend for a while of doing what's called go song by song, which means they come in and they set up and they record and they stay on one song until that one song is finished. Well, you exponentially explode your studio budget doing that because you've got so much time going out and tearing down,
breakdown and setup,
striking gear and mics from this to now this instrument, and then you got to start it all over again for the next song. And I never did understand how any producer ever went along with that, but it was a thing for a while. It was the dumbest thing I'd ever seen. But a lot of people did it. I'm not going to name any names.
Well, so where are you now in your career?
Well, staying with the tech thing, which it turns out pays the bills pretty well. I had avoided Nashville for a long time.
Yeah, it's kind of the arch enemy in some ways, right? Of Memphis.
Well, because I'd always knew that knew it from a studio rat's perspective. And I knew that the studios in Nashville is a real clique, and it is. And I knew it was a tough nut to crack. And I had been working with a band called Alter Bridge, which was Creed with three of the guys from Creed and Miles Kennedy on vocals. And I started with them because I had worked with Creed on the Weathered CD, and they called me day one of Alter Bridge and said, "Hey, do you want to work on this project?" I'm like, "Yeah." I went and heard the band. I'm like, "Yes, I do." So I worked for Alter Bridge for 10 years. And I watched sorry guys, a number of mistakes that were made between business decisions between them and the label. And I was marveling because I'm thinking, you guys were in one of the biggest bands on the planet. You know, you should have paid better attention, I would think, but it's not my job as drum tech to tell them, you know, you're screwing up. But after 10 years, and we would go to Europe all the time, these guys would play crap gigs in the U.S., go to Europe and play enormous festivals.
Yeah.
They were hugely popular in mainland Europe and the UK, and come here and it's like, who? And after 10 years of doing this, they had worked their way up to working 1 month, my final year with them. And I'm like, you guys are killing me. I mean, and there was, you know, there was no retainer.
Yeah.
So everybody that knew me as a studio rat for the 10 years I was with him, they're thinking, well, between Creed and Alter Bridge, he's working all the time. They just quit calling me. So I started throwing lifelines out. And somebody happened to answer from Nashville, somebody I'd worked with before. And it was a person who was doing front of house for Luke Bryan. And he said, listen, let me talk to management here. So he pitched me to management, and they brought me to Nashville. I went out, and I kind of got the third degree. You have a meeting with Luke's manager, she's a real sweetheart, it turns out.
I'm sure.
And had to have a meeting with the tour manager, who's also a sweetheart. Just, he doesn't seem that way to a lot of people. And apparently I passed because now it's been 8 years with Luke.
8 years.
Yes.
So 8 more? What are you thinking? You gonna do this forever?
No. No.
Because you're still making music too.
I am making music, and
I know Brad came over yesterday, and you're jamming with him still. I mean, you got plenty of stuff going on.
I am, but this road dog stuff, I mean, I'm no spring chicken anymore. And
I couldn't tell by looking at you. You look good.
You should see it from this side. The writing's on the wall for this at some point. I mean, I'm out running right now with guys in their 20s and 30s doing this, and I can do it, but I know it's not going to last forever.
Sure.
So
got to take care of yourself.
My wife and I are trying to work towards retirement now, and
you got a nice quiet piece of land down south across the border.
I do. And
that's in Mississippi, not Mexico. For
yes.
Clarification.
Yes.
It's the Memphis border.
Everybody says, but you got a killer drum room at your house. No, I do not. It's quiet at my house. It's quiet.
Irony.
I like it like that. Yeah, we have 5 acres in Mississippi, and it's there's no shortage of stuff to do there. I mean, we took a piece of land and have 60 to 70 trees in an orchard in the front yard and a 3,000 square foot garden in the back.
Mm-hmm.
So
you grow your own food?
A lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems like a perfect place to have your life now. Got it all set up. You got what you want. You can. I mean, it seems like your future is self-determined. You can kind of make your own choices. That's pretty much what we all want, right?
Well, I want to do another few years with Luke, just because it's fun, and give credit where it's due. The people that I work with are all really good. Luke's drummer's a straight monster and is one of the sweetest people on the planet. And Luke is a gem. I wouldn't trade this job for all the whiskey in Scotland. And if you know me, you know
That's
that,
a big statement to make.
Yes, it is. Luke, what you see on TV, the only difference between that Luke and the Luke in real life is he's a lot funnier in real life.
You just got more time to say it.
He does. And he can say some stuff that people might look at, askant.
Well, this day and age is kind of, the standards for that are a little bit different than they used to be, right? It's hard to say anything, get away with it.
Well, it is, but I don't mean it in a bad way. We have on the set, there are microphones around each player's position with a talk button on it so that they can talk to us, everybody that has in-ears in, talk to the crew, to say, hey, I need more of me in my mix or whatever they need. And Luke has one too. About my third or fourth show, Luke, I'm still new guy, and it was a long time since I've been a new guy in a crew. Comes running back to the mic after the first song, and he goes, "Stage 7 stalker alert." And I'm like, what does that mean? What's that? And I'm like, damn, I got to look for a guy with a gun in the crowd, or what are we looking for? And I go do another 2 or 3 songs, and Luke comes running back, and he goes, "I'm not kidding, boys. If she had a deer rifle, my head would be on her wall right now." Man, I've been scanning the crowd, looking for something like
you're stressing out.
Yes. Because I mean, there's been some wacky stuff on the road.
Yeah, I have no doubts.
So,
well, I know we could just keep talking, but I feel like we got to wrap this up at some point. And I think before we do, I would love for you to share. This is all Memphis Made. This is about what makes Memphis great. How do you feel Memphis has really contributed and enhanced your journey through life, musically and beyond?
Memphis was the start of opening my eyes. Memphis gave me the impetus to want to start playing music, listening to stuff that was from here. Mm-hmm. That's what got me originally interested. And then, of course, my horizons began to broaden around the world. But the original thing was from here, and there is a you can't touch it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but there is a Memphis thing. People I played with in Atlanta, somebody
when they hear you're from Memphis,
they made a comment the other day about, well, somebody sent me a track and they said, "Is this you on this track?" I can't remember. No, it's not me. He goes, "I didn't think so. I didn't have that Memphis thing." Okay.
I love it.
It is a real thing, and I love that. There's a bad side to everything, but the positive is what I took and ran with to whatever extent I've run.
Yeah. Well, listen, I can say it's pretty far. I know just meeting you and knowing what I've heard and hearing your music and knowing the projects now. A lot of what you shared today, I didn't know. Knowing your background and all the work that you put into music and just, continuing the efforts that Memphis started, I have to say thank you. It's
Thank
important.
you, Brett.
It's important work.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
You get to be my age and you start looking back and you began to review things. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of things I would have done a little smarter had I known better. Yes. Well,
I got more than a couple. I
But-
got a little while to go from your age.
well, a lot of the things I did that were not really smart, I'd probably do it again anyway,
Yeah.
just because it was fun. I mean,
Well, so it makes you who you are, right?
exactly.
You're pretty proud of that, I'd say.
I'm comfortable
Yeah.
with it.
And you should be. Well, listen, Tony, thank you, man.
Thank you.
I
Brett.
appreciate you. Cheers.
All right, brother. Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to check out any of our other content, you can visit our website at station8productions.com or our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Station8Productions. Thanks.